At 5:04 on a January morning, billionaire Gabriel Mercer watched a woman kneel in freezing rain outside his Baltimore office tower. Her plastic bag had split open. Hundreds of aluminum cans rolled across the sidewalk, flashing silver beneath the streetlights. He nearly turned away. Then a bound document slid from the torn bag and stopped against the toe of his shoe. It was not a court file. It was not a shelter application. It was a graduate thesis, protected beneath a cracked plastic cover. The title was about preventing mothers and infants from dying in forgotten neighborhoods. Beneath it was the name Naomi E. Brooks, Master of Public Health, Chesapeake State University. Gabriel had built an $8 billion logistics empire by believing that the world respected only power, speed, and money. But before that week ended, the woman gathering cans outside his tower would lead him back to a name he had not spoken aloud in 34 years. A name buried inside her research. A name that belonged to the woman whose death had made him rich and left him empty. Gabriel Mercer was 48 years old, the founder and chief executive of Mercer Continental Logistics, a company with warehouses, trucking routes, and shipping contracts across 20 countries. His office occupied the 32nd floor of Mercer Harbor Tower, a wall of blue glass rising over Baltimore's inner harbor. From his windows, the city looked orderly. Roads became lines. Buildings became blocks. People became motion. That was how Gabriel preferred the world, distant enough to measure. He owned a penthouse with 3 guest rooms no guest had ever used. He wore watches that cost more than the house where he had grown up. His name appeared on hospital wings, university buildings, and donor walls polished so brightly that no one could see the frightened boy still hiding behind the letters. Gabriel had grown up in West Baltimore with his mother, Lorraine Mercer. She washed linens at a nursing home during the day and cleaned law offices at night. She left before sunrise and returned after dark, with swollen hands, sore feet, and enough gentleness left to ask her son about school. They had very little, but Lorraine never allowed poverty to become the only truth in their home. She kept a jar on the kitchen counter labeled Sunday Supper. Even in the hardest weeks, she placed $1 inside it. On Sundays, she used that money to cook chicken, greens, and cornbread for Gabriel and whichever neighbor had less than they did. When Gabriel was 14, Lorraine developed a cough. At first she covered it with her sleeve and smiled. Then came the fever. Then the breathlessness. The neighborhood clinic had reduced its hours after losing funding. Lorraine walked nearly 3 miles one cold afternoon, only to find the doors locked and a paper sign taped inside the glass. She returned home exhausted and tried to sleep it off because the emergency room required 2 buses and she had no money for a taxi. Gabriel called an ambulance the next night when she collapsed beside the kitchen table. He was placed on hold. The ambulance came 41 minutes later. Lorraine died in a hospital corridor before a doctor could begin treatment. The infection was common. The medicine was inexpensive. The delay was fatal. Gabriel remembered sitting beneath fluorescent lights with his mother's purse in his lap. Inside it were $7, a folded grocery list, her work badge, and the key to an apartment that would no longer be theirs. No father came. No relative arrived. A social worker eventually led him away. For the next 3 years, Gabriel moved through 2 foster homes and 1 group residence. He learned not to unpack completely. He learned that adults could promise permanence on Monday and send you away by Friday. Most of all, he learned that helplessness had a price. At 17, he began unloading trucks at night. At 22, he bought a used delivery van with money saved from double shifts. At 29, he owned 12 vehicles. At 36, he purchased a failing regional freight company. By 40, Mercer Continental was an empire. Every contract he signed was another locked clinic door he believed he had defeated. Every dollar was another minute his mother would never again spend waiting for help. But grief is not healed by success. It is merely given more rooms to echo through. 3 months before Gabriel first noticed Naomi Brooks, his closest business partner, Adrian Vale, disappeared after stealing $46 million through false vendors and offshore accounts. Adrian had stood beside Gabriel for 13 years. He had attended private dinners, knew the story of Lorraine's death, and once called Gabriel the brother he had chosen. The betrayal did not surprise Gabriel as much as it confirmed him. People left. People lied. People used whatever trust you offered them. After Adrian vanished, Gabriel stopped sleeping. He began arriving at the office before 5 every morning, not because the company required it, but because the penthouse became unbearable after midnight. In the dark, there were no meetings to control, no numbers to review, and no voices to drown out memory. So he sat alone on the 32nd floor with black coffee and watched the city wake. That was where he first saw her. A woman in a faded green coat crouched beside the recycling bins at the corner of Light Street and Pratt. She carried 3 bags and moved from bin to bin with a calm, deliberate rhythm. Aluminum went into one bag, plastic went into another, tin went into the third. She flattened each can before placing it inside. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Gabriel looked away. Baltimore had taught people how to look away from suffering without feeling cruel. You told yourself you had a meeting. You told yourself you paid taxes. You told yourself someone else had a program for this. But 10 minutes later, he was at the window again. The woman was still there, sorting in the freezing dark. Her coat was worn, but clean. One sleeve had been repaired with black thread. Her hair was pulled into a careful bun. Her shoes were old, yet the laces were tied evenly. Even from above, he could see that she worked with precision, not panic. At 6:12, she tied the 3 bags, checked a small notebook, and disappeared toward Lombard Street. The corner became empty again. Gabriel returned to his desk, but the image remained. The next morning, she returned at 5:03. On the 3rd morning, she paused to give exact directions to an older man who appeared sick. Gabriel could not hear the conversation, but he saw her point east, then north, then hold up 8 fingers, likely explaining the opening time of a free clinic. On the 4th morning, she sat on the curb and drew a graph in her notebook. Gabriel pressed one hand against the cold window. People did not draw graphs on sidewalks at 5 in the morning, unless numbers had once meant something larger to them. For the first time in years, he found himself asking a question that did not involve profit, risk, or betrayal. Who was she? Her name was Naomi Brooks. She was 35 years old, and 2 years earlier she had been the director of the East Baltimore Maternal Health Partnership. Naomi held a master's degree in public health from Chesapeake State University. Her thesis proposed training women from underserved neighborhoods to serve as community health guides. They would help pregnant mothers understand warning signs, arrange transportation, find clinics with open appointments, and ask the questions frightened patients often forgot once a doctor entered the room. The pilot program she designed reached more than 1,000 families. It reduced missed prenatal visits, connected mothers to emergency care earlier, and drew attention from health officials across Maryland. Naomi was never famous. She was never wealthy. She did not need to be. She came home each evening to a small apartment in Edmondson Village, where her husband Isaiah cooked late dinners after his hospital shifts, and their daughter Grace covered the refrigerator with drawings of birds, dogs, and houses that always had yellow doors. Isaiah Brooks was an emergency room nurse at St. Anne's Medical Center. He worked nights, drank coffee too strong for anyone else, and had a habit of humming old gospel songs when he was worried. He believed in Naomi's work with a seriousness that sometimes embarrassed her. Whenever she doubted whether a grant proposal mattered, Isaiah would point toward Grace sleeping down the hall. "It matters if one mother gets to come home," he would say. "It matters if one little girl still has somebody to call mama." In the autumn before their life collapsed, Naomi learned she was pregnant again. Isaiah cried when she told him. Grace immediately began calling the baby Peanut, and drew 4 people in every family picture, though the 4th was only a small circle beside Naomi's dress. For 11 weeks, their future seemed modest and certain. Isaiah picked up extra shifts so they could move to a safer apartment. Naomi began a new funding proposal that would expand her program into 3 additional neighborhoods. They argued gently over baby names and kept a tiny knitted cap in the top drawer of their bedroom dresser. Then, on a wet November night, Isaiah finished a 16-hour shift. The hospital was short-staffed. He had agreed to stay because 2 nurses had called out, and he could not leave an emergency department already overflowing. At 8:36 that evening, he drove home through heavy rain. A commercial truck ran a red light at the intersection of North Avenue and Charles Street. The driver had exceeded his legal hours. The company had altered his logbook. Isaiah's car was pushed across 2 lanes and crushed against a concrete divider. The ambulance carried him back to the same emergency room where he had spent 7 years saving strangers. Naomi received the call while reading Grace a bedtime story. She remembered the page. A mother bird was teaching her chicks to fly. At the hospital, Isaiah lay beneath white sheets with machines breathing for him. His hands, the hands that had tied Grace's shoes and rubbed Naomi's shoulders after long meetings, were cold despite the heated blankets. For 6 days, Naomi sat beside him. She was 14 weeks pregnant. She barely ate. She slept in a chair. She ignored the tightness in her abdomen because every doctor who entered the room carried another sentence she was terrified to hear. On the 4th night, the pain became severe. A nurse begged her to go downstairs to obstetrics. Naomi refused until she collapsed near the elevator. The child she and Isaiah had already named Samuel did not survive. Naomi woke in a different hospital room with an empty space beside her, and Isaiah's wedding ring clenched inside her fist. 2 floors above, her husband was still alive, only because machines had not yet been turned off. The next morning, doctors told her Isaiah had no meaningful brain activity. Naomi signed one set of papers for her husband, and another for the child she had lost, without ever holding. There are griefs the human mind cannot carry all at once. It divides them into smaller pieces: a signature, a ring, a folded blanket, a tiny knitted cap placed inside a paper bag by a nurse who could not meet her eyes. Grace was 5 years old. When Naomi returned home without Isaiah, the little girl ran past her and looked into the hallway. "Where is Daddy?" Naomi knelt on the floor, still wearing the hospital bracelet from her own discharge, and held her daughter while the truth entered their home. The medical bills arrived before the funeral flowers had wilted. Isaiah's insurance covered only part of the intensive care. Naomi's emergency treatment and pregnancy loss created another account. The truck company denied responsibility, while attorneys argued over records. Their savings disappeared within weeks. Naomi returned to work 23 days after burying her husband, because her program had deadlines and because grief did not pause rent. She found the office half empty. A federal grant had been canceled. The nonprofit was cutting staff. Naomi's position was eliminated, along with 6 others. Her supervisor told her he had fought for her. He said it while staring at the floor. The severance paid less than 1 month of rent. Naomi applied for jobs immediately. She had a graduate degree, 6 years of leadership experience, and a program with measurable results. But every interview reached the same question: "Can you explain the gap and the instability in your recent work history?" Naomi told the truth. "My husband died. I lost a pregnancy. My position was eliminated. I am rebuilding." The interviewers softened their voices. They praised her strength. They promised to call. They did not. 2 months later, the landlord taped an eviction notice to the apartment door. Naomi packed their life into Isaiah's damaged sedan, the one the insurance company had repaired just enough to return. She stored the rest in a small rental unit on the west side. Inside were their wedding photographs, Isaiah's nursing certificates, Grace's baby clothes, the wooden rocking chair he had restored, and the top drawer containing the knitted cap meant for Samuel. Naomi missed 2 storage payments. The unit was auctioned. She arrived one morning with $80 and found a new padlock on the door. Everything was gone. The manager gave her a printed receipt and said he was sorry. That afternoon, Naomi sat behind the wheel of the car and understood that grief could happen more than once. A person could be buried, and then the evidence that they had lived could be taken too. Only 3 things remained from her old life: Isaiah's wedding ring, Grace's stuffed rabbit, and a copy of Naomi's thesis that had been inside the trunk instead of the storage unit. She wrapped the thesis in plastic and carried it everywhere. Not because she expected anyone to read it, because it was proof that before the hospital, before the eviction, before strangers began speaking to her slowly, as if poverty had damaged her mind, she had built something that mattered. For 6 nights, Naomi and Grace slept in the car. The first shelter was full. The second accepted women but not children during an outbreak of illness. The third placed them on a waiting list. On the 5th night, the temperature dropped below freezing. Grace's asthma tightened her chest. Naomi held the inhaler to her daughter's lips and counted each breath while the car heater coughed warm air for 20 minutes, then died when the fuel gauge touched empty. Grace looked at the fogged windows and whispered, "Mommy, did we do something bad?" Naomi turned away before answering. "No, baby. We are just going through something hard." She did not say that hard things often lasted longer than the people inside them believed they could. A bed finally opened at Harbor House Women and Children's Shelter on East Fayette Street. Naomi and Grace were given a narrow cot, 1 metal locker, and a schedule taped to the wall. Breakfast at 7, daycare until 5, lights out at 10. The shelter kept them alive, but it could not rebuild them. Every 30 days, Naomi had to prove she was still seeking work. Every morning, Grace folded her blanket with the solemn care of a child who understood that nothing belonged to them permanently. Naomi applied for 73 jobs in 10 months. She received 4 interviews. One employer said the position required a stable home address. Another asked who would care for Grace if she became sick. A third told Naomi she was overqualified for an assistant role but undercurrent for a director role, a word that meant her suffering had become professionally inconvenient. Naomi took temporary cleaning shifts, food service work, and warehouse assignments whenever they appeared. The hours changed without warning. Without reliable childcare, none lasted. Then she began collecting cans. At first it was desperation. Later, it became a system. Naomi mapped 6 routes through downtown Baltimore. She tracked which blocks produced the most aluminum and how quickly sanitation crews arrived. The office district was best before dawn. University streets were best after lunch. Restaurant alleys were best after closing. She counted every can. She weighed every bag. She recorded weather, distance, and payout. On a good day, she earned $34. On a bad day, $18. The numbers never added up to rent, but they added up to asthma medicine, bus fare, clean socks, and the small carton of chocolate milk Grace received every Friday. Naomi woke at 4. She collected until 6:30. She returned to Harbor House, washed in the shared bathroom, woke Grace, braided her hair, and walked her to the shelter daycare. Then Naomi continued working until the afternoon. Her hands cracked from winter air and metal dust. Her shoulders developed deep red marks where the bags cut through her coat. Once, she found blood on her sleeve and could not remember when she had been hurt. Still, she kept her notebook. She had once used data to protect entire neighborhoods. Now she used it to keep one little girl fed. That was the woman Gabriel Mercer watched from the 32nd floor. He did not know about Isaiah. He did not know about Samuel. He did not know that the green coat had belonged to her husband. He did not know Grace slept each night with a rabbit whose stuffing had come loose because it was the only toy that survived the auction. He only knew that Naomi moved like someone whose life had been reduced, but not erased. On the 5th morning, Gabriel did not go upstairs. He stood across the street beneath the dark awning of a closed restaurant. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving the pavement slick. Naomi arrived at 5:01 with her 3 bags and began working. Gabriel watched her flatten cans, check her notebook, and move in the same efficient pattern he had memorized from above. Near the 3rd bin, her shoe slipped. The movement caught one of the bags against a jagged piece of metal. Plastic tore. Cans spilled across the sidewalk and rolled into the gutter. Naomi dropped to her knees. Something else fell from the bag. A bound document struck the wet concrete. Several pages came loose and lifted in the wind. Naomi ignored the cans. She reached for the document with both hands and pressed it against her chest. Gabriel crossed the street before he had decided to move. He caught 2 pages near the curb and held them out. "These blew away," he said. Naomi looked up sharply. At close range, Gabriel saw the exhaustion beneath her eyes. He saw rain clinging to her lashes and a small scar near her left temple. He also saw the cover of the document, Preventing Maternal and Infant Loss in Underserved Urban Communities, a Community Health Guide Model. Naomi E. Brooks, Master of Public Health. Chesapeake State University. Gabriel's hand stopped. Naomi snatched the pages and pushed them into the binder. "It is nothing," she said. Her voice was defensive, almost angry. Gabriel looked at the way she held the thesis, both arms around it. Cans worth money rolled past her feet, yet she did not release the document. "That is not nothing," he said. Naomi stood. "You do not know what it is. Then tell me." Her face closed. She gathered the bags, leaving several cans behind, and walked away quickly toward Lombard Street. Gabriel remained on the sidewalk with rain soaking the shoulders of his coat. For the first time since Adrian's betrayal, he opened his laptop not to investigate theft, but to search for a stranger. Naomi E. Brooks, Public Health, Baltimore. The results appeared immediately. Archived conference programs, a state health report citing her work, a photograph of Naomi standing beside a projector, wearing a Navy suit, explaining a community health model to a room of doctors and policy advisors. The photograph was only 3 years old. In it, she looked rested, certain, alive in a way that the woman outside his tower had trained herself not to appear. Gabriel read about the East Baltimore Maternal Health Partnership. He found the outcomes of Naomi's pilot program and the grant applications she had written. He found testimony she had given before a city health committee. He found no scandal, no fraud, no explanation for how a respected program director had become a woman collecting cans before sunrise. He leaned back and stared through the glass at the empty sidewalk. The distance between the woman in the photograph and the woman in the rain was less than 3 years. It looked like a lifetime. The next morning, Gabriel arrived with 2 cups of coffee. He had negotiated mergers with hostile boards and governments. He had spoken before thousands of employees without notes. Yet standing beneath the lights of his own tower at 4:58 in the morning, he rehearsed a single sentence and disliked every version of it. Naomi appeared at 5:06. She saw him before he spoke. Her shoulders tightened. Gabriel held out 1 cup. "It is just coffee. I do not need saving," she said. "I did not say you did. Men wearing coats like yours usually do not stand outside before sunrise unless they want something." Gabriel placed the cup on a stone ledge and stepped back. "I read your thesis." Naomi froze. "Not the whole thing," he added. "Not yet, but enough to know that someone who wrote it should not be invisible." Her expression changed from shock to shame, then from shame to anger. "You searched me." "Yes. Did you find the photograph of me at the state conference? That is the one people like. It makes the story cleaner. Educated woman falls. Billionaire notices. Everyone gets to feel grateful that the world still contains kindness. I am not taking your photograph. Not today." The words landed harder than Gabriel expected. Naomi turned back to the bins and pulled out a crushed can. Gabriel remained still. "My company employs more than 20,000 people," he said. "We spend a fortune treating preventable health problems after they become emergencies. Your model could matter to us." Naomi dropped the can into her bag. "You have consultants. I have consultants who have never waited for 2 buses to reach a clinic." She looked at him then. For a brief moment, he saw the professional behind the worn coat, the woman accustomed to evaluating whether a claim had substance. "What do you want from me?" "I want to understand your work. People do not want work from women carrying garbage bags." "I do. You do not know me." "No, but I know the work exists, and I know you protected that binder before you picked up a single can." Naomi's eyes moved toward the coffee on the ledge. "The sanitation trucks will be here soon," she said. Gabriel nodded. He entered the tower without asking another question. From the 32nd floor, he watched Naomi continue her route. At 5:28, she walked to the ledge, lifted the coffee, and took 1 careful sip. The next morning, she did not return. Gabriel waited until the sanitation truck emptied the bins. The morning after that, he waited again. Naomi had changed her route to avoid him. For 3 days, Gabriel stood outside with 2 coffees that grew cold in his hands. He could have ordered security to locate her. He could have searched shelters, followed recycling routes, or used the same investigators hunting Adrian Vale. He did none of those things. Power had taught him how to reach people. It had never taught him how to respect their distance. While Gabriel waited, Naomi worked a less profitable route through Mount Vernon and along the Jones Falls Trail. She lost nearly $10 each morning, but the loss felt safer than becoming an object of interest to a rich man. She had trusted interest before. After Isaiah died, Naomi called Marlene Hayes, a former colleague who had eaten lunch beside her for 4 years. Marlene promised to send job leads. Naomi watched 2 messages change from delivered to read. No answer came. She contacted her graduate advisor, the professor who had once described her thesis as the strongest field study he had seen in a decade. His assistant replied that he was traveling and would call upon his return. He never did. At a community support event, a volunteer photographed Naomi holding a paper plate without permission. The picture appeared online beneath a post celebrating the volunteer's generosity. Thousands of people praised the woman who had taken the photograph. No one asked the name of the woman inside it. Naomi had become evidence of someone else's goodness. After that, she stopped attending charity events. Kindness from strangers, she learned, often arrived with a hidden invoice. Gratitude, obedience, access to your grief, permission to tell your story. So she stayed away from Light Street. But on the 4th night, Grace had an asthma episode. The child's inhaler released only 1 weak dose before going empty. Naomi sat on the shelter bathroom floor with Grace between her knees, listening to every strained breath while a staff member called an urgent care clinic. Grace recovered, but the replacement medicine cost more than Naomi had earned in 3 days. That night, after Grace fell asleep, Naomi opened her notebook. The numbers were merciless. Even if she collected every day without illness, rain, or injury, she could not earn enough for an apartment. She could not save for a deposit. She could not create stability from aluminum. Across the room sat Dolores Whitaker, a 64-year-old former school librarian who had lost her home after a stroke ended her career. Dolores had lived at Harbor House for nearly 2 years. She had the patient eyes of someone who had watched pride keep good people trapped. Naomi told her about Gabriel. Dolores listened. When Naomi finished, the older woman asked one question. Did he talk about your poverty or your work? My work. Did he offer money? Number. Did he ask for a picture? No. Then perhaps he saw the part of you everyone else stopped looking for. Naomi stared at the cracked floor. I cannot afford to trust the wrong person again. Dolores leaned forward. Baby, you are already paying for the people who failed you. Do not let them charge interest. Naomi looked at Grace, sleeping with the thin blanket tucked beneath her chin. The stuffed rabbit rested against her cheek. The hardest truth was not that Naomi feared Gabriel. It was that a small part of her wanted him to be sincere. Hope had become more frightening than hunger, because hunger was familiar. Hope asked a person to imagine losing something again. After Dolores turned off the lamp, Naomi searched Gabriel Mercer on her cracked phone. She found the company, the fortune, the missing partner, the guarded interviews. Then she found an old article about his childhood. His mother, Lorraine Mercer, had died after being unable to obtain timely care in West Baltimore. Naomi sat upright. The name stirred something in her memory, but she could not place it. She opened the digital copy of her thesis stored in her email. The shelter connection failed twice. When the document finally loaded, Grace coughed in her sleep, and Naomi closed the phone to check on her. She did not reach the acknowledgments. At 4:30 the next morning, Naomi set her alarm. Gabriel was already waiting when she arrived at 5:02. 2 coffees, same place, same dark coat. Naomi stopped several feet away. I do not want your money, she said. I am not offering money. I do not want pity. I am not offering pity. No photographs. No photographs. She studied him. Then what are you offering? Gabriel looked at the thesis visible beneath her coat. A conversation about work. Naomi accepted the coffee. That was all. But for both of them, it was the first door that had opened in years. That night, Gabriel read Naomi's thesis from the first page to the last. He read the research questions, the interviews, the maps of neighborhoods where pregnant women missed care because the bus routes failed them. He read Naomi's proposal for training trusted residents to recognize danger signs and guide patients through a system that often punished people for not understanding it. He read about mothers who were described as non-compliant when they had no transportation. He read about women who waited in emergency rooms until fear became catastrophe. He read about families whose losses were recorded as percentages because institutions found numbers easier to carry than names. Near midnight, Gabriel reached the acknowledgments. Naomi thanked Isaiah for heating dinners she had forgotten to eat. She thanked Grace for coloring beside her while she revised chapters. She thanked the women who trusted her with stories they had never told doctors. Then he reached the final paragraph. This work is dedicated to every mother whose life was reduced to an administrative delay, including Lorraine Mercer of West Baltimore. Mrs. Mercer walked nearly 3 miles to a neighborhood clinic and found its doors closed after funding cuts reduced its hours. She died days later from an infection that could have been treated. Her story was shared during a community interview by Evelyn Price, who remembered Lorraine as a woman who fed neighbors from a kitchen that rarely held enough food for her own family. Lorraine Mercer does not appear in an official report. She lived. She mattered. Her son deserved to know that the world did not forget her completely. Gabriel read the paragraph once, then again. Then he placed both hands on the desk because the room had begun to tilt. Evelyn Price had lived across the hall from Gabriel and Lorraine. She had been the neighbor who called the ambulance when Gabriel's voice broke over the phone. She had disappeared from his life after he entered foster care. Naomi had found Evelyn years later during field research. She had found his mother. Not the death certificate, not the hospital account. Lorraine herself, the Sunday supper jar, the meals, the locked clinic. The boy left holding a purse. Gabriel stood and walked to the window. Below him, the corner was empty. For 34 years, he had believed that money was the only proof a life mattered. He had put his name on buildings because no one had put Lorraine's name anywhere. He had donated millions to institutions, but never spoken publicly about why. And a woman he had watched gathering cans had given his mother something he had been unable to buy. Witness. Gabriel lowered his head. "She remembered you, Mama," he whispered. The words broke something open. He did not sob. He had forgotten how. But tears came quietly, without permission, and fell onto the glass desk where billion-dollar agreements had been signed. For a long time, Gabriel remained alone. Then he understood what he could not do. He could not hand Naomi a check and call the debt settled. He could erase the medical balance, rent an apartment, and congratulate himself, but that would make her suffering another transaction. Naomi had preserved Lorraine's dignity. Gabriel would have to protect Naomi's. The next morning, he called Helena Price, Senior Vice President of Human Resources. "I need a new position evaluated," he said. Helena had worked with Gabriel for 10 years and did not waste time asking why his voice sounded different. "What position?" "Director of Community Health Integration, embedded inside employee wellness, field-based preventive care for distribution centers and drivers. We do not have that function. We should. We spent $190 million on employee health costs last year. Emergency room use is rising. Absenteeism is rising. We keep treating consequences because no one inside this company understands barriers before they become emergencies. You have a candidate. I have a body of work." Gabriel sent Naomi's thesis, program results, and archived presentations. Helena called back 90 minutes later. "The work is strong," she said. "Very strong." "Where is she employed now?" "She is not." "Consulting?" "Number." "A university?" "She is living in a shelter with her daughter." Silence. "Gabriel," Helena said carefully, "the board will scrutinize this. Then let them scrutinize the work. If she fails the interview, she does not get the job. If she succeeds, her address is irrelevant." "Does she know about the position?" "No." Helena sighed. "You created an executive role for a woman who does not know she is being considered. I created a role because the company needs it. I am asking her to compete for it because she may be the best qualified person I have found. That distinction will matter. It matters to me." Helena agreed to hold the interview. For the next 2 mornings, Gabriel returned to the corner. Naomi came once, accepted coffee, and spoke with him for 7 minutes about community health systems. He did not mention Lorraine. The discovery was too personal to use as persuasion. On the 3rd morning, he made the offer. Not a job, he told Naomi. An interview. She narrowed her eyes. For what? He explained the role, the budget, and the expectations. Naomi listened without interruption. Why me? Because your work fits the need. Because you feel sorry for me. Number. Because my thesis contains your mother's name. Naomi had finally reached the acknowledgments the night before. She had read the paragraph and understood why Lorraine Mercer had felt familiar. Gabriel did not hide his surprise. You know. I know now. Then you also know I cannot pretend the connection means nothing. Naomi's jaw tightened. That is exactly what I was afraid of. Gabriel stepped back. My mother's name made me read every page. Your work is what created the interview. Helena Price will question you. She will reject you if you cannot do the job. I will not interfere. And if I fail, then you fail an interview. You do not owe me gratitude, your story, or another conversation. Naomi looked down at the coffee between her hands. When? Monday, 10 in the morning. She thought of Grace's empty inhaler, the shelter cot, Isaiah's ring, Samuel's knitted cap lost in a storage auction, 73 applications, 4 interviews, no calls. She also thought of the woman she had been before grief taught the world to speak over her. I will be there, she said. Monday morning arrived with sleet. Naomi woke before the shelter alarm and sat beside Grace in the blue darkness. For 14 months, every morning had begun with calculation, weather, bus fare, daycare hours, can wait, medicine. Today began with something more dangerous. Possibility. Dolores lent Naomi a navy blazer that was too wide in the shoulders. A shelter volunteer pressed the wrinkles with an old iron. Naomi cleaned her shoes with soap and a toothbrush. She placed her thesis in a new binder purchased for $4 at a pharmacy. Grace watched from the cot. Are you going to be a doctor again? Naomi smiled sadly. Mama was never a doctor. You helped doctors. Sometimes. Then go help them again. Naomi kissed her forehead. At 9:42, she stood outside Mercer Harbor Tower. The same glass doors she had watched from the sidewalk now reflected a woman in borrowed clothes holding the last surviving proof of her old life. For a moment, she could not move. A sanitation worker emptied the recycling bins behind her. Aluminum struck metal with the familiar sound of survival. Naomi entered the building. The security guard checked her name and printed a visitor badge. He did not look at her shoes. He did not ask why the address on her identification differed from the address on her application. He pointed toward the elevators. 31st floor. Naomi rode upward alone. Helena Price waited in a conference room with 2 division leaders from employee operations and finance. Gabriel sat at the far end of the table. He nodded once and remained silent. Helena began without ceremony. Ms. Brooks, this position would require building a health program across 4 distribution centers, 3,000 employees, multiple labor agreements, and a limited first-year budget. Tell us why your community model belongs inside a logistics company. Naomi opened her binder. For the first 2 minutes, her voice trembled. Then Helena challenged one of her assumptions. Naomi responded. A finance director questioned the cost projections. Naomi stood and drew a framework on the whiteboard. An operations leader argued that employees would not trust a corporate health program. Naomi explained why the guides had to be recruited from the workforce, trained independently, and protected from management pressure. The room changed. The borrowed blazer disappeared. The shelter address disappeared. The woman sorting cans disappeared. What remained was expertise. Naomi spoke about truck drivers who delayed care because missing one route meant losing overtime. She spoke about warehouse workers who used emergency rooms because primary care appointments conflicted with rotating shifts. She proposed mobile clinic hours, peer health guides, transportation partnerships, and confidential referrals. She did not ask for mercy. She asked for a budget. She did not describe her suffering. She described measurable outcomes. At the 45th minute, Helena closed the folder before her. One final question. Naomi sat down. Your thesis mentions Lorraine Mercer. Did you know she was Gabriel's mother when you wrote it? No. How did you find her story? A woman named Evelyn Price shared it during field interviews in West Baltimore. She remembered Mrs. Mercer feeding neighbors on Sundays. She said the clinic doors were locked the day Lorraine sought help. I included the story because policy language can erase the person inside a preventable loss. Gabriel looked down. Naomi continued more softly. I believed someone should write her name somewhere permanent. Silence filled the room. Helena looked toward Gabriel, then back to Naomi. Mrs. Price also said, Lorraine left behind a 14-year-old son. Naomi's eyes moved to Gabriel. For the first time, she did not see a billionaire. She saw the boy from the interview notes, the child who had watched adults arrive too late. I am sorry, she whispered. Gabriel raised his eyes. You did not fail her. Neither did you. The words reached him where money never had. Helena allowed the silence to remain, then returned to the folder. Ms. Brooks, based on your qualifications and this interview, I am recommending you for the position of Director of Community Health Integration. Naomi did not move. The role includes senior director compensation, full medical coverage beginning on your first day, and 6 months of transitional housing support available to any qualifying employee relocating from unstable housing. Naomi stared at Helena. Any qualifying employee. Any qualifying employee, Helena repeated. This is not a private favor. Naomi looked toward Gabriel. He had understood. He had built help she could accept without becoming indebted to him. When do I start? She asked. 3 weeks later, Naomi and Grace moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment near Patterson Park. It was not luxurious. The floors creaked. The kitchen was narrow. The bedroom windows faced a brick wall. To Grace, it was a palace. She ran from room to room asking which light switch belonged to her. She opened the closet 6 times. She placed the stuffed rabbit on the bed and taped a drawing of 4 people above it. Naomi stopped when she saw the 4th figure. Grace had never stopped drawing Samuel. That night, after her daughter fell asleep, Naomi sat on the bedroom floor with Isaiah's ring in her palm. I got back, she whispered. Then she corrected herself. No, we got back. She cried for the husband who should have seen it, for the child who should have slept in the second room, for the photographs and furniture sold to strangers, for every version of herself that had been forced to survive long enough to reach this floor. Healing did not arrive as happiness. It arrived as permission to grieve somewhere safe. Naomi's first year at Mercer Continental was not easy. Some executives believed Gabriel had hired a symbol instead of a director. One board member referred to her program as an expensive charity project. A regional manager asked whether she had the temperament for corporate work. Naomi answered with preparation. She recruited 32 community health guides from the company's own workforce. She chose people others already trusted, a dispatcher who cared for his diabetic father, a warehouse clerk who translated medical forms for neighbors, a driver who had once slept in his truck because he could not afford rent near his route. Naomi trained them to recognize warning signs, connect workers to care, and protect privacy. She arranged clinic hours before dawn and after evening shifts. She negotiated transportation vouchers and medication delivery. She built the system the way she had once built routes for aluminum cans. Observe, measure, adjust, waste nothing. Within 12 months, emergency room visits fell. Sick days dropped. Workers began receiving treatment before manageable problems became crises. The company saved millions, but Naomi cared most about smaller numbers. 7 mothers received high-risk prenatal referrals before complications became emergencies. 41 employees found primary care doctors. 1 truck driver discovered a heart condition during a screening and lived long enough to attend his daughter's wedding. Those were the numbers Naomi placed at the top of every report. At the annual public health conference in Washington, she stood before more than 300 professionals and presented the results. Grace sat in the front row wearing a yellow dress. Dolores sat beside her, having moved into a senior apartment through a non-profit housing program Naomi later helped strengthen. Gabriel stood at the back of the room. Naomi did not introduce him as the man who rescued her. She introduced him as the executive who allowed evidence to challenge pride. After the presentation, 3 companies requested help adapting the model. A hospital network offered to fund training in 2 additional states. Naomi agreed on one condition. Every new program had to employ people from the communities it served. Opportunity, she had learned, became dignity only when it stopped treating lived experience as a flaw. Gabriel changed too, though not in ways visible on magazine covers. He testified against Adrian Vale when investigators recovered part of the stolen money. He no longer described the betrayal as proof that trust was foolish. It was proof only that one man had betrayed him. That distinction freed something. Gabriel began eating Sunday dinner in West Baltimore at a community kitchen funded in Lorraine's name. He returned to the foster residence where he had once lived and quietly created scholarships for teenagers aging out of care. He also spoke publicly about his mother for the first time. Not as a tragedy used to decorate his success, as Lorraine. A woman who worked 2 jobs, a woman who fed neighbors, a woman who died because help was too far away and too late. The Lorraine Mercer Community Health Center opened on a cold October morning, 4 blocks from the apartment where Gabriel had grown up. The center offered primary care, prenatal services, mental health counseling, and evening walk-in hours. No donor wall stood in the lobby. Instead, one framed photograph rested near the entrance. Lorraine at 31, laughing beside a kitchen table. Beneath it were the words she had once told her son. "We may not have money, but we still have one another." Naomi stood beside Gabriel at the opening ceremony. Their relationship never became a romance. It became something rarer and, for both of them, safer. Respect without possession. Gratitude without debt. A friendship built not on rescue, but on recognition. After the crowd left, Gabriel and Naomi remained in the lobby. Grace was drawing at a small table near the children's clinic. Dolores was speaking with a nurse. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Gabriel looked at Lorraine's photograph. "For years I thought becoming rich would prove she mattered." Naomi followed his gaze. "She mattered before you had anything. I know that now." Gabriel turned toward her. "You carried her name when I could not." Naomi held Isaiah's ring beneath her sleeve, feeling its familiar edge against her skin. "And you gave my work a place to live when I thought it had died with everything else." Neither of them said more. Some debts are not repaid. They are transformed into doors for the next person. Every morning, Naomi still woke before 5. Sometimes she stood in her kitchen while Grace slept and listened to the quiet. The old fear would return for a moment. The fear that the apartment could vanish, the job could disappear, the inhaler could empty, the ground could open again. Trauma does not leave simply because the address changes. But now Naomi had something she had not possessed in the car, the shelter, or the cold streets outside Mercer Harbor Tower. A future that did not depend on the weight of a bag. On the anniversary of Isaiah's death, she and Grace visited his grave. Grace placed a drawing beneath the stone. It showed 5 people this time. Naomi, Isaiah, Grace, Samuel, and a small woman in a white apron whom Grace had never met. "Who is that?" Naomi asked. "Mrs. Mercer," Grace said. "The lady Daddy says we helped remember." Naomi's breath caught. "Your daddy never knew her." Grace considered this. Maybe people can know each other through what they leave behind. Naomi looked at the drawing, then at her daughter. "Yes, baby," she said. "Maybe they can." At 5:04 the following morning, lights came on across Baltimore. Sanitation trucks moved through downtown. Nurses changed shifts. Mothers waited at bus stops. Office towers filled one window at a time. Outside Mercer Harbor Tower, the recycling bins stood beside the curb. Naomi passed them on her way to an early meeting. For a second, she stopped at the place where her bag had torn open, and her thesis had fallen into the rain. The sidewalk looked ordinary. That was the strange thing about places where lives change. They rarely look sacred afterward. Naomi touched the binder inside her work bag. It was the same thesis, still protected by the cracked original cover. She kept it not as evidence of who she had once been, but as a reminder of what circumstances had never been able to take. Her mind, her purpose, her name. Then she entered the tower through the front doors. 32 floors above, Gabriel stood at the window with 2 cups of coffee, one for himself. One waiting for the woman whose work had remembered his mother, restored her own dignity, and taught a man with billions that the deepest form of help is not to lift someone above you. It is to recognize that they were never beneath you at all.